back to QuietKat's video series on maintenance. In this video, we're going to talk about replacing the shifter cable. The tools you will need to replace your shifter cable are a good solid set of crimpers, good solid set of cable cutters, 5mm Allen wrench, Phillips head screwdriver. You may need a small flathead screwdriver, and then of course the parts you'll need: a new shift cable and a cable end. So the derailleur is controlled by the shifter via a cable and tension on the cable. The cable runs through this piece of housing that protects it and also gives it a path to move. Over time, this can become gunked up, the cable can kind of stretch, and needs to be replaced for easy and smooth shifting. Like every derailleur adjustment we do, the first thing is to shift down to the smallest cog, that's the hardest gear. So we're going to start by shifting on down. Now we've got our chain shifted down to the smallest cog. That means the least amount of tension on the cable. We can go ahead and start disassembling the old cable. Using your 5mm Allen wrench, you go ahead and loosen the tension bolt that holds the cable in place in the derailleur. Pull that back. You notice we've got a little cap on the end of the cable. We're going to go ahead and remove that, or you can just cut the cable to get that out of the way. So we'll go ahead and cut the end of the cable to get that cable end out of the mix. Go ahead and discard that. Now our cable is free flowing, so we're just going to pull it out of the derailleur, pull the housing out, and just get it to this point so that we know we can pull from the other end. So moving up to the shifter, first thing we want to do is locate the small plastic Phillips head screw that's on the inside of the shifter. In this case, it's actually in the way with the brake caliper. So we're going to go ahead and loosen the shifter and move it so that we can get access to that Phillips head bolt. Loosen that up, just kind of give it a pivot, and now we can see that Phillips head bolt on the inside of the shifter. So now that we can get to this bolt, use our Phillips head screwdriver. We're going to open that up. Only takes a half a turn, then we can go ahead and pull out that plastic plug. You may need to get a flat head to get underneath it to pry it out. So now that we've got that plug out, we can go ahead and get access to the cable. So on the other end, we're just going to pull on the housing. We can see some cable slack coming out. We can pull some of the cable through that housing and then slowly feed the cable back out of the shifter. Might be a little bit stuck in there, so we want to look in and see. You might need to wiggle that or kind of bend it around a little bit. At worst case, you might need to get a little pick and get in there and grab that cable end and pull it out of the hole. So once we have our cable end out of the shifter, we can go ahead and start pulling. Pull the cable all the way through the shifter and through the housing. Cable's about 3 feet long. There's our old cable out. We can discard that, get our new one, slide it in. So now that we have our new cable, everything feels nice and clean and polished. We're going to go ahead and feed it back the same way. So we're going to start by going through this hole in the shifter. And if you look in, you can see a groove where the cable is going to need to line up to get into the spool. You'll notice as you look through the hole, you can see daylight on the other side, and that's what we're aiming for with the cable. So once we have the cable through the shifter, then we're going to feed the cable through the housing all the way until we see it come out the other end. So now that we have the cable back through the shifter, it's time to go back through the housing. First set of housing is only about 6 inches long, and it's going to go from the shifter to the shift sensor. So if we disconnect that on both ends, we can much more easily feed the cable through, and we see it come back out that first piece of housing. Next, we're going to go into the shift sensor and then into the cable behind that. Now that we have the cable through the shift sensor, we want to line the housing up into the shift sensor just to make sure that everything is in place. Then we'll continue feeding the cable through the rest of the housing. Alright, so we continue feeding in until we see it start coming back out the other side. At that point, we can make sure our housings are lined up, and then we can pull the rest of the slack in from behind. Now that the cable is all the way through the shifter, we want to keep things in place by starting with the plug that goes in the back of the shifter. This uses the Phillips head screwdriver. We're just going to slide this into place, into the grooves, give it a quarter turn, and that's tightened up and in place. Next thing we want to do is adjust our shifter back to position so that we can line up the entire cable route. So we use our 5, loosen up the clamp, go ahead and put the shifter back to the riding position, tighten that down. Remember, not too tight on the shifter. We want it to be able to move out of the way in the case of a crash. While we're still up here at the handlebars, we're going to go ahead and make sure that our cable housing is fed into the right grooves between the shifter and the shift sensors. And then we're not going to be battling against any misalignments as we go in to adjust the shifting. So with the housing in place, we'll go ahead and pull some more tension on the cable, just looking all the way up the line to make sure that everything is all lined up. If everything looks good, we can begin feeding back to the derailleur. Go with our cable through the guide loop, bring the cable end down into place, right on through the guide here in the rear, and back towards the clamp on the groove. Some derailleurs don't have this guide here, the cable will go straight to the groove. based on what type of derailleur you have, just go ahead and follow that line into the tension point. Next, we use our 5mm Allen wrench. Make sure that there's room for the cable to get lined up. Look for the groove on the underside and go ahead and tighten that cable into place. Remember, tight enough that the cable stays in place, but not so tight that we break things. Now that we have the cable initially hooked up, we're going to go through and test and just make sure that everything settles into the right spot. We may need to loosen this, pull some tension, and readjust it a couple times in order to get the cable tension just right for easy, smooth, and accurate shifting. So back up here at the front of the bike, we're going to spin the pedals manually, make sure that everything's moving, and then test our shifting one gear at a time. It looks like we've hit every gear, so our cable tension is on point. We can go ahead and trim up our cable and finish up the job. So back at our cable, we're going to go out just a few inches from the end. We want to have enough room that we can work with the cable for maintenance purposes, but not so much that it gets in the way. I like about 3.5 to 4 inches from the clamp is a good spot. Using a nice strong set of cable cutters, these need to be sharp and strong, make a good clean cut right through the cable. Now we're going to put a cap on for a little bit of protection. These cable ends typically ship with your shifter cable, and they're going to go right in the end here to prevent this wire from fraying. We want to slide it all the way in, and then using a nice strong pair of pliers, go ahead, clamp the aluminum, pushing real hard so that the cap clamps all the way down around the cable, keeps that in place, nice and safe, keeps the cable from fraying. If you need further adjustment on your derailleur, check out our video on adjusting your gears and shifting.